on this topic of characters and their methods and how they solve different crimes, I'm very curious if you've ever thought about this question before, and maybe your fans are also curious about this question. What method do you have for solving a mystery? If you have
one. I've never been asked that. Let me think. Well, I would say that my method is...
Hello and welcome to the Mystery Gamedev Podcast, where we cross-examine the developers of mystery-themed video games and investigate the skills it takes to make one yourself. Today's guest is LockedOn, the creator of Methods: The Detective Competition. Right now, he is working on a prequel game called Methods: The Canada Files, currently in early access. LockedOn also composed one half of the award-winning soundtrack for the award-winning murder mystery visual novel Reaplaced, and our listeners are actually hearing some of those songs during this intro and outro of the podcast right now. So thank you, LockedOn, for letting me use those for the podcast.
Sure.
It helps me out quite a bit.
No problem.
So let me just start out by asking, how have you been lately? What kind of things have been going on in the world of LockedOn?
Well, I've spent the past month outlining the mystery for File 4, and I recently completed that, actually. So I've begun writing the 16th chapter in the game, which is the first chapter of File 4. This is for the Canada Files.
Sounds very productive.
Yeah, I mean, I always think, oh, the outline, that won't take very long, and then, takes a whole month, and then, yeah, I think I'm glad to be back on track and sort of, going into production on this.
For our listeners who maybe don't know what Methods even is, although to be fair, you have a pretty big audience. You have, just for reference, Methods has almost at this point 500 reviews, most of them 91% positive. So that's a really impressive statistic. But for any of our listeners who don't know what Methods is, could you go ahead and describe it for them and explain why they might want to play it?
Sure. So it's kind of an interesting take on like the detective genre, where it's about a detective competition between 100 detectives who are all solving mysteries in this contest, which are created by 100 criminals. And so they're sort of teamed up into pairs, and they all solve sort of these small mysteries. And along the way, they try to uncover more about like what this contest's whole deal is, who the person running it is. And then at the end of the contest, you have sort of one criminal and one detective face off against each other. And, if the detective wins, they get $1 million. And if the criminal wins, they get $1 million, and they get parole as well. So there's sort of a lot of incentive for the detectives to win. And, uncover who's running this contest.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. I've told you this before, but a long time ago, I've always been interested in the idea of a detective competition, and you beat me to it, but that's fine.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think you did a better job than I would have done anyway, because honestly, I would have never thought to do half of the things that you did. I finally took some time to play the game, and
oh yes,
I'm only about 4 or 5 hours in, and there's just so much. It really blew me away, actually, about how much stuff there is in the game. And you described it that way to me once before too, that it's a game about a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah,
and there is a lot of stuff in that game. So, can you sort of elaborate on what you mean by that?
Sure. So, like, I think part of the appeal of the game is that it's always throwing new stuff at you. In like every chapter, there's like a new character, there's a new mystery, there's like new questions being asked, and like a ton of new music. Also, like there's about 2 hours worth of music in the game, 2.5 hours, I think.
Yeah, that really. I mean, some games aren't even 2.5 hours long. So.
I know. Yeah, I threw so much stuff in there. It is kind of like how much quantity can I make, and trying to keep the quality keep the quality up with that as well was a bit of a challenge, but I think I mostly pulled it off.
And how long did you have to work on methods from start to finish?
So usually what I say is that it took about a year from start to finish, because the visual novel, like the majority of it, was made in a year. But I had 55 chapters of the novel already written, and then I converted it to a visual novel. And I'd been working on that novel for a long time, and I'd kind of put it to the side, and then I realized it would make a really good visual novel. So yeah, I had a lot of raw material to work with, which helped me make it really quickly. So yeah, production time was actually like 10 months, because I was doing 10 chapters per month pretty much.
Hmm.
And there are 100 chapters in the entire game.
So how long did it take you to write that initial novel portion?
Well, I did take a break, but I would say it's maybe 3 years. I was pretty casual about it. Like I would just sit there in my bed at night, writing it on my iPad, sort of every night, writing like a chapter or two.
Mm-hmm.
Having the short chapters really helped me feel like I was accomplishing something, because you could write, a whole chapter in
Mm-hmm.
like one sitting, and that made it really easy and fun to write. And so I would just kind of tinker away at it, and it kind of just was in the back of my mind, and then I got distracted with other projects. But eventually, I got around to it, making the visual novel and finishing the story finally.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that short chapter structure, I think, also helps from from the standpoint of the player playing the game, um,
Mhm.
where you feel like you're making a lot of progress really fast. It's interesting that it's sort of a double-sided effect, where it helps you finish the game faster, and it helps, I think. I know when I was playing the game, it just gives me a feeling of like certain games where you just want to play one more turn. In this game, you just want to
Right,
read one more chapter. Yeah, it had that effect on
exactly.
me for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like Oreos. Like you finish one Oreo, and then you're like, the next Oreo, gotta finish, and then you finished a whole sleeve of Oreos in no time.
So okay, so for people who don't know what he's talking about, there's a character in Methods that always references Oreos. So let's address that question first. Where did that idea come from? That there's a character who always talks about Oreo metaphors.
I think that was just trying to come up with something funny and random for him to say, and it wasn't that deep. But the more I thought about it, it's kind of a commentary on how clunky metaphors are usually.
Hmm.
Like they never really, like more often than not, they kind of obfuscate what you're actually trying to make clearer by
Hmm.
using them. So it's kind of making fun of that sometimes, but most of the time it's just, this is something silly that he can do. And when I would think about my novel, like after I stopped working on it for a little while, um, that character was always the character that I was like, yeah, that's a really memorable character, and that's a really memorable catchphrase that I was sure, you know, would be fun to see when I got around to making the visual novel.
Yeah, he was definitely one of my favorite characters too when I was playing that
Hmm.
because he's got so many different funny poses, let's say, where
Oh yes.
he'll just uh, he's sort of a dancer. He dances, he spins upside down, he does all kinds of things, right? Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah, he
and
has so many different poses, more than any other character in the game.
yeah, he's also sometimes he's actually animated. His sprite is animated, which I thought was a neat touch to see.
Yeah, a little bit.
Uh,
It's like two different frames, but yeah, it's technically an animation.
by the way, before we get too off topic, I just have to ask, what's your favorite kind of Oreo? Do you have one? Do you enjoy eating them, or?
mm, I'm really basic. I just like the regular old Oreos. I don't
Okay.
I don't really I'm not a huge fan of any of their
Okay.
flavor they try to like birthday cake Oreo. I don't know. I would stick to just regular Oreos.
Cool. That's my favorite
Do
too.
you like the? Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah, that's my favorite too. Yeah, the original.
original all the way.
It's funny because I don't really eat much chocolate or sweets at all, but I will eat Oreos. They're like the one food that I will eat. So
Yeah, there's something about them, something magical.
not sponsored. Not sponsored.
Not
Although
sponsored.
I'm
Not
open
sponsored.
I'm open to it, but if anyone's listening. Uh
Yeah, I mean, I've given them a lot of free advertisement at this point. Actually, I'll see posts from fans. They will like post a picture of an Oreo
mm,
package that they bought or something.
wow.
So I've definitely helped a little bit increase the sales of Oreos.
Wow. Viral
Um,
marketing. There you go.
yeah, exactly.
Um so going back to the characters, uh that particular character was very interesting to me because, he's so for context, he's one of the smarter detectives. He's one of the smarter ones. And
Mhm.
there's all kinds of detectives in this game. There's some very stupid ones at the beginning. Although honestly, the story starts out with Detective Hackett, who is not particularly bright. He his name tag, or as you call it, his name hashtag, because they're all name tags with hashtags, which I think is such a funny thing. His hashtag is thinks with fists, and so he's the kind of guy who thinks with his fists, and he shows up to the competition and he has like three different guns he has to give up before they let him in because it's like, and he gets in there and he has this little confrontation with this guy who thinks he's better than him because, you know, I guess he's more intellectual or whatever. And
Right.
then they split up and they each find their different partners, and Hackett's partner is Detective Mouse, and
Mhm.
uh it's funny because it's honestly the surprising thing. I should say this actually. The surprising thing to me was just how funny everything was. You put so much humor into
Mhm.
every aspect of the story, and I was really not expecting that. So
Oh yeah.
from the beginning, all of this stuff with Hackett showing up and really not knowing what he's doing. Like when he gets to that first puzzle room and he's like, "Man, I hope this other guy solves it for me." Like that's so unexpected in the first place, and it's funny. It's just funny to read. Um,
Mhm.
and then I also have to say, I played that first chapter way back in January of this year, and I thought, well, okay, this is clearly a story about Detective Hackett and how he's going to win the competition. And so I just sat on the story for a long time, didn't play it, and I start playing, and like the next couple chapters, it's like, oh, we have a point of view switch to a totally different set of characters, and at this point,
Yeah.
I don't know if we're ever going to get back to Detective Hackett. So, you know, um,
Well, should I spoil that for you? I don't
no,
know. But
whatever you want to
um,
do.
I guess I won't spoil it. Yeah, absolutely. Humor is a big reason why I think the game found a big audience because it's kind of hard to find like really comedic detective games and content. I mean, I don't know. I
Mhm,
also think humor is like it's so good at getting you to like something and
mhm,
getting you to like characters. A really funny character is just likable, but being able to write a funny character is also very hard. So, um, yeah, I really enjoyed. Uh, I feel more comfortable writing characters who are really goofy and sarcastic and kind of more than writing the serious characters, I think.
mhm.
So that was part of the fun for me too, was having all those jokes in there.
Yeah. Then it's just nonstop, really. It's like I
Yeah.
I I found it. I found that I was trying to stop myself from laughing quite a bit because it was like I there's just so much humor in the story, and that's a very unique thing for a mystery game to do actually, because when you think about it, most mystery games naturally are kind of dark inherently. They're sort of this morbid
Right.
topic of solving a murder mystery, and actually in methods there aren't actually any real murders. It's all pretend, basically.
Right. It sort of gives me the license to be more comedic with it. I think if it was real murders, obviously there's a real dark humor place that could go, I guess. But
Yeah.
unless you're into dark humor, there's that would be difficult to make it like fun or likable
Hmm.
or any of the things that I'm able to get away with because they're all like essentially they're like those escape rooms people like to do.
Hmm.
And yeah, the game master has set up this little crime scene, and yeah, it's supposed to be fun. But then it does have this dark side of the criminal side of the contest, and like they're actual criminals. They're not people pretending to be criminals. So it does have that sort of more darker part to it that I think gives it a bit of edginess, which is also compelling in a different way.
Hmm.
But that's explored like more later in the story
Hmm.
to a certain extent.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent maybe it does get really dark, or if that lighter tone eventually wears off.
I would say it's always pretty lighthearted, but it knows when to be more take things more seriously, I would say,
Hmm.
especially more towards the end.
Also, now I'm a little curious. Is it, did you decide to have those pretend murder mysteries because it would lend itself better to comedy?
I don't think so. I think it just kind of my writing was always a little comedic, and I just dialed it up
Mm-hmm.
for this project, and it just happened to all mesh really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I got lucky in that magical way that creative projects can sometimes uh, come together in a way you don't expect.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And it's not just the writing though, because again, when we talk about the sprites and the animations, I mean that adds a lot to the, when you see
Hmm.
it, when you see the character who, what we were talking about earlier with the Oreos, his name keeps changing. That's also a sort of a running
Yeah.
joke. Um, is that every time he solves a mystery, he has to change his name because his name is the number of mysteries he solved. So um,
Yeah.
it's hard to even sort of name the guy because his name keeps changing. But um, he uh, he has all kinds of ridiculous poses, and they go really well with his. I think it's because he tends to be very, um, I guess, for lack of a better word, arrogant about how he can solve the mysteries, and he shows it
Hmm.
off to his partner a lot, and it just seems like his sort of nonchalant attitude about how he can just solve things pretty easily, paired off with his
Right.
ridiculous poses, is just like really funny to look at, right? And you can't really get that just
Yeah,
from a novel if you were just reading it.
that's true. I think um, it was in novel form, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a point where there wasn't that funny visual, but it absolutely adds to the comedy. And another thing about visual novels, which makes them a really good medium for comedy, is that you have this format that's like, you see one line, click, see the next line. It's actually a perfect way
Mm-hmm.
to set up a punchline.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that in a novel, like if your reader like looks at the bottom of the page by accident, then they get the punchline spoiled, of course. So um, I think in the translation to visual novel, I was able to take advantage of some of the medium's qualities in that way.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I do think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think every text box in the game is just one line of text, right?
Yeah, I think I keep it pretty short. Yeah, I don't want you to have too much in a text box
Hmm.
at once.
Yeah, many other visual novels might have anywhere from a paragraph to a page of text, but you keep it pretty short to just like one or two sentences at most. And I think that
Yeah,
does help deliver the comedy a lot better.
yeah, and pacing wise, methods is very like punchy and tight, and like these short chapters that are like addictive and all these jokes and things. I think it adds up to something that's really fun to read. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's part of the appeal for me. I don't know why every reader might enjoy it, but that's why I enjoy it.
Yeah, speaking of the different chapters, I want to mention that it is really interesting how you decided to make each chapter intro. There's like a screen that pops up every time there's a
Mm.
new chapter, and each one is totally different with its own design and colors and animation. And that is just such a
Yeah.
cool thing. I would have never thought to do that. Whenever I do chapters, it's usually just like a black screen with white text on it, something like that. And it's
Mm.
like it's really cool
Right.
because it builds up this anticipation for something that normally I wouldn't even think twice about. Um,
Thank you. Yeah. And all the music is unique too for each
oh wow,
chapter.
that's even
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, so those were always like I think they are very important actually. In building that anticipation and being like, oh, I've reached it's like you're sort of unlocking the next goal, right? It's
Hmm.
kind of like I've reached one chapter, the end of one chapter, and then I have this nice visual as like a reward. It's a
Hmm.
unique visual and it's not, the same sprites I've been seeing
Yeah,
over and over. So yeah, I think yeah, they're very cool and very important to the identity of methods for sure.
yeah, that's a really interesting point that there is this constant flow of new stuff being shoved into your face as you play the game,
Mhm.
and I wonder if that is just a really powerful way to, in today's society, let's say, keep people's attention because their attention
Right.
spans are very much shorter than they used to be. Um, so keeping the
Yeah.
mysteries fairly small, fairly self-contained, and just pushing more and more content in their face, basically, is maybe that's like a really powerful thing people can learn from.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard to develop a game like that because you do have to be able to create all those assets and all those ideas and maintain that for a very long time to kind of get the full effect of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it could work on a smaller scale too. Um, but yeah, it's sort of like the complete opposite of my previous game. In many ways, the way I developed methods was sort of like in response to what I'd done on Broken Minds, which was my previous game, my first game I released on Steam, which was, you have this much more intimate game that's like just about a small cast of characters, and you actually literally have to play the game multiple times with very, like, not that much variation
Hmm.
to see all the endings. And so it's almost like the complete opposite, where instead of getting new stuff constantly thrown at you, you have to familiarize yourself with the old stuff over and over.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting. And Methods is the one that became the popular game. So I guess that says something about what the more popular approach is to take.
Yeah, I guess so. Um, is Methods for the most part, just to be clear about this, is it a fairly linear game where there's not really any branching choices, or does it branch off at
Yeah.
different parts? Okay, it is linear.
Yeah, it's pretty linear. I mean, there are a few kind of secret alternate paths that are sort of secret, not really, but I mean, for instance, you can make Hackett completely lose instead of just be, I guess, down in the rankings
Hmm.
by the end of his section there.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
and yeah, there's a few other choices. Some are more explicit than others that do lead to slightly different outcomes, but overall, it's completely linear. And that was something I decided. I created this prototype, the visual novel, like maybe 1 or 2 years before I actually began production on it. Uh, again, in 2019. And that earlier version had a lot more choice. Like you could choose to be more of an asshole to Mouse during your investigation and like kind of distance yourself from him, like as Hackett and other stuff. And another thing I wanted to do was have you be able to choose which detective's method you were using to solve different pieces of evidence.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
would have like a different mini game or something,
Hmm.
and like you would have different outcomes depending on that. And I realized, I have 100 chapters in this game. Maybe I shouldn't focus too much on the branching paths and just make sure I can complete 100 chapters of something.
So it must have been so it was a pretty deliberate choice to restrict the choices, for lack of a better
Oh yeah,
term.
yeah,
Um, so with that in mind, it still would have taken a lot of effort and time to like create all of the different things, all of the
Mhm.
like as because just as I'm playing it, it's like, well, I'm imagining how much time and effort it must have taken you to draw and animate all the sprites, compose all the songs. I mean, there's like 90 songs in the game. Model
Yeah,
all the backgrounds in 3D, with all this,
yes.
the different lighting and textures and camera angles. I mean, there's just so much stuff, and it's and honestly, I thought about this too. You probably kind of have to have all the story figured out before you go and animate all that, because it would kind of suck to 3D model a whole room and find out the mystery is not going to work, right?
That's true. I did have like the mystery part figured out for sure. Once like I was modeling everything sort of as I needed it, and I would write it first or like convert it from my novel version to my visual novel version, and then I would, look at what backgrounds I needed and then model them from there. But sometimes a lot of these processes got sort of mixed around because I was working with like a weekly deadline, trying to complete uh, like 2 to 3 chapters per week. So sometimes I would be in a situation where I was kind of writing the mystery like as I was literally rendering the uh, the backgrounds for it, and making little tweaks here and there. But for the most part, I would know like what I needed before I began that process
Hmm.
on the backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense that a 3D render can take quite a while to wait for it to get done, so you can sort of parallel, do
That's
some
true.
parallel work.
But there was definitely some re-rendering that I had to do at certain points for various reasons. So that slowed me down a
Hmm.
little for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that always probably happens to some extent on a project where you can't always get
Yeah,
everything totally right on the first try. Um,
yeah, you're always tweaking things last minute, and there would be times I would release the chapters and then I'd go back and revise them with the next release and stuff. Because I was doing weekly releases, it was pretty easy to
mm.
quickly get changes out.
So when you say weekly release, you mean like to the public? You were putting them out there on the internet every week. It's pretty dedicated.
Yeah. So it was all on itch.io,
Hmm.
and yeah, I would do it every week, and there were like a few people who played it, but it was honestly not too many during the like early access quote unquote period. Um, yeah, it only really blew up after I put it on Steam.
Yeah, that's also an interesting story, to go through that whole explanation.
Right.
For our listeners who may not be aware, Methods was not an instant success. It had to take some time before it blew up. And so could you please explain how that went?
Right. So I basically just dumped it on Steam with zero marketing or anything. And I was just like, all right, we'll see how it does.
Yeah.
That was just my attitude at the time towards releasing things. And then a Chinese streamer called Sound of Mystery saw it, and for whatever reason, he decided to play it, and he really liked it, and he started streaming that to his audience on Bilibili, which is like the Chinese Twitch or Twitch/YouTube. And he's a pretty big streamer, and his stream got a lot of, fan attention, and they were sort of clued into my game. And from there, it just kind of built a Chinese audience from his stream, and also Sanren, who was another big Chinese streamer who played it after he did. And Sound of Mystery has continued to sort of support methods, and like he helped me find my publisher, actually, Arabit Studios,
Hmm.
much later. So he's always been a big advocate for the game, and he always streams like my latest updates on Canada files and stuff. And he's been really amazing in helping the game become like a popular thing. Yeah.
Nice. That's really cool. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of people are probably wondering then, how do you stay in contact with? I mean, presumably you don't know Chinese as a language, right?
I do not.
So
Yeah.
how do you stay in contact with these people, and how do you communicate with your fans in China?
So Sound of Mystery can speak English. He's completely fluent, and a lot of the fans are too. But so after Sound of Mystery streamed the game, some of his fans reached out to me about doing a Chinese translation and had nothing to lose, so I said yes. And then in like 1 month, they translated the entire game, like working really hard
Wow.
to do that. And so 1 month later, they kind of like helped bring it to an even wider audience in China. And then um, they've kind of been helping me translate my posts and things into Chinese for Chinese audience. So they're sort of my window into what the Chinese fan base is doing, basically.
Your next game, Methods the Canada Files, that's an early access game. So is your Chinese fan base pretty active in participating in that early access game?
Yeah, yeah, they are posting fan art like every single day.
Wow.
It's pretty incredible, and it's been a long time since Methods came out, and since it grew a fan base, and they're still posting fan art every day, pretty much for the past 4 years. So they're really passionate and really excited about um, what's coming in Canada Files and the sequel to Methods and everything. It's really incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people would be jealous of that, I think. So
Yeah. I still can't believe it myself. I mean, I kind of forget about it, and then I like certain Chinese social medias, and I see, oh wow, yeah.
what do you think made it stand out to that particular audience as opposed to, like, why do you think it blew up over there and not in the West so much until later, I guess? I guess it must have picked up a little bit in
Hmm.
the West after that, but what do you think?
Not all that much actually. Like it's still like 80 to 90% Chinese
Hmm.
uh customers buying the game and Chinese fans. But honestly, I don't really know what it was about the game that made it particularly appeal to a Chinese audience. Like I definitely wouldn't have thought it would. Um, but I do think it really helps that Sound of Mystery loved the game so much, and that he also live translated it
Hmm.
into Chinese, which is incredibly difficult. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of streamers who wouldn't be able to do that. And then when Sanren played the game, he played the Chinese version, so it was translated for him, but then he did like all these different voices for all the characters, and that's also like a huge amount of work. Um,
Yeah.
I do think like having big streamers play your game is like the most important marketing thing you can do, like
Hmm.
as an indie dev. So I think in there were no like American streamers who played the game at all. Like maybe a few, but they weren't very big streamers.
Hmm.
So I think that's really why is that a big streamer played it. And beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, I can just look at why I find the game appealing. I think there's certain things that are just across different cultures. These things are appealing.
Hmm.
But I am surprised about the humor because, a lot of it is like puns and like things that I wouldn't think would translate that well into another language. But a lot of it is also character based. So I can kind of see how it could still be funny to someone who wouldn't get a pun I make. But yeah, they might see 772's wacky expressions or like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the humor aspect, because sometimes things might get lost in translation, but uh,
Right.
I guess that didn't. So
Yeah, somehow.
let's go back to what inspired Methods to begin with, um,
Mhm.
because maybe that will explain some of what everyone likes about it. what was your inspiration for creating methods, basically?
Well, the one that usually comes to mind as my main reference is Liar Game. Um, just because of certain ways in which that uh, competition, I guess it's a competition. I don't quite remember actually, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so they have multiple game masters and they have this sort of dynamic between the two main characters that's kind of like 772 and Nell's dynamic in some ways. Um, I think that's probably the biggest inspiration, but I was pulling from so many different things. I mean, there's a bit of Danganronpa in there, definitely. But yeah, I mean, the other ones are like, well, the short chapters was reading Jack Reacher. I noticed that those chapters are like 1 or 2 pages. And it was so easy to finish a chapter. It's, well, might as well finish another chapter. Oh yeah, I should write something like that. And then the little mysteries that are sort of like contained in just one chapter. That's very inspired by the 2 Minute Mysteries by Donald Sobel, which is like a small book of like, I think it's like 200 mysteries or something. Like it's a crazy amount of mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little short description, and then like, can you solve it? And usually it's some kind of the solution has to do with like a cultural assumption that often it's a little
It's a little outdated.
like a little precarious, a little outdated perhaps,
Yeah.
but it's still very fun. And I've always loved this idea of like a tiny self-contained mystery that's like just really tight. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's super appealing. Sometimes when the mystery is like a big sprawling thing that has all these different layers and stuff, it's, well, um, I can't even keep track of this. So uh, it makes I think it helps you sort of engage the reader in that puzzle because it's so simple. It's kind of like, well, there's a lower bar to entry basically. So more readers might be trying to think about what the solution is.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Um, have you noticed specifically that people who are not necessarily people who play mystery games, uh,
Mm.
playing methods because of that, or
Yeah, I do think so. I think it's a very approachable game for people who don't usually play like Ace Attorney or these other games
mm-hmm.
in that kind of genre. Yeah.
I also noticed that, I mean, there are, like you mentioned, there are quite a few similarities between methods and liar game, because that did not
Mhm.
click in my head that, oh, the relationship between those two characters is the same in both stories. I see
Mm.
exactly what you're doing there. Um,
Yeah.
uh, I did notice also though that since you mentioned it to me earlier, before we started talking here, I did actually pick up 2 Minute Mysteries as a book to read because
uh,
I'm pretty certain that I read this book when I was in like grade school, like fifth or sixth grade. A lot of these are coming back to me now as I sort of went through some of them. Um,
oh yeah. Well, that could also be because he recycled ideas from Encyclopedia Brown. If you read Encyclopedia Brown, then you probably have like are familiar with some of these mysteries for sure.
in the game, for example, in methods, uh, there's like a case file that you get whenever you enter a new puzzle room,
Mm.
and the case file is like 1 paragraph long, and it's
Right.
actually even shorter than these like 1 pages. Like 1 paragraph is not much to go on.
Yeah, they are short. They are. That is probably where I got that inspiration. Actually, come to think.
um, and then every story in here, every mystery in this book ends with a question, and every puzzle and methods ends with a bonus question. And I'm like,
Right.
was that a thing? Or
Um, maybe. I don't remember at this point, but uh, probably. Yeah, I think I did take a lot from that book, and
I see it as you carrying that torch on to another maybe generation of people who never read that first book. Um,
hmm.
and I love those kinds of little puzzles. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know when I was a kid, those were the books I went to in the library at school. Was like the puzzle books. Um,
Right.
so
Yeah, me too. And I was a big fan of Encyclopedia Brown and Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and a lot of different mystery books. I mean, yeah, that whole idea of like an iconic detective character really stuck with me, I think.
mhm. I guess on that topic, I have to ask real quick: is Red July's outfit inspired by Carmen Sandiego?
Yeah,
Okay,
it is.
okay,
But not intentionally. Like it's sort of like
not intentionally. Okay.
yeah, so what happened with that is for some reason I misremembered Carmen Sandiego as wearing yellow. I don't
Hmm.
know why, but then when I decided to like make that character, I was like, oh yeah, she'll be red instead of yellow like Carmen Sandiego. Then later, I found out to my horror that Carmen Sandiego had been wearing red the whole time. It's really
So
a bit of a disappointment.
there was no emergency plan to rename her to Yellow July instead of Red July.
No, I think Red July just kind of stuck, and yeah. But fortunately, she's different in basically every other way. So
Yeah. Yeah, how do you come up with those characters in the first place? There's a lot
hmm.
of very interesting characters, and one thing we haven't really mentioned so far actually are the actual methods that these characters use. Um,
Hmm.
and essentially, they are these, as far as I understand, I think of them as like superpowers that they have. Um,
Yeah, basically.
and each detective has their own superpower that lets them solve the crime scene in different ways. So they're all solving the same puzzles as part of the
Hmm.
competition, but they have different methods by which to solve them, and that is just such a cool idea in itself. Um,
Hmm.
but how did you actually come up with the different characters and their methods when you first designed them?
Hmm. Um, well, it was a very quick process for the most part. I think like I would come up with the characters as I was writing the novel, and a lot of it was just kind of like what would be a cool character to see at this moment. But I would come up with the name first, and then I would kind of, based on my like in-baked assumptions about that name and like what that name kind of sounds like,
Mm,
that's actually how I would sort of conceive of the character is through their name.
hmm,
Um, so yeah, something like Coles, it sounds like cold, right?
mhm.
Sounds like someone who's, a bit arrogant, maybe.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it would just kind of stem from that. And then, he's cold, so his tie is blue, maybe, and he has black hair, kind of giving that cool feeling.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I approach most of the characters. But, some of them I would come up with in different ways. But the majority of them, I would say, is that way. And then the methods themselves, I was just really racking my brains to come up with something different for everybody. I don't think I completely succeeded, like a lot of detectives who have kind of similar memory-based methods, and I do kind of wish I'd spent a little more time thinking of more unique things for everybody. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, the method would also kind of inform what the character looked like too. Sometimes, kind of like how a superpower, the superhero outfit, if they use like flames, then they're probably gonna have a red outfit,
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, yeah, but I'm trying to come up with more interesting methods that and like the idea of a method, like a method is a process, and
Mhm.
there's many different ways that can manifest, and like sometimes it can manifest in a way that the detective has to kind of like know something that other characters can't, or like a way of observing things in a way that others can't. Sometimes it's a way of like thinking about the whole situation in a different way. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do with someone's method.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
And some of these methods actually tie into the gameplay element a little bit. It was
Hmm.
because I noticed, there's a certain character who has the ability to she has to wear glasses to see, but when she looks at something up close, like a clue, she can see things that other people can't see. And whenever you play that part, you end up clicking on the screen in different ways around that clue in order to uncover the evidence, right?
Yeah.
So you tied that method into the gameplay. Did you have like, and maybe there's more of those later on, I don't know.
Oh yes.
Okay.
There's
Cool.
a lot more.
Good to hear. But how did you sort of come up with the gameplay systems for some of those methods? Like how did you come up with the method first and then think, how do I make gameplay out of that? Or did you come up with, this would be a cool gameplay system, let me reverse that into a method someone can have?
Yeah, it was all story first, then gameplay. And yeah, maybe the gameplay could have been a little more interesting if I'd done gameplay first. But and it's also about like variety, having different things that you're doing when you investigate all these different crime scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just another way to throw something new at them to kind of shake things up from a gameplay perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing with the methods gameplay was that I had to be sure that none of it was too frustrating or difficult. So that's why they're all pretty easy in terms of gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing really puzzly going on there. But yeah, it was all just about keeping everything accessible. Because my previous game, Broken Mind, had like these really very arduous puzzle sections that were full of a lot of like unique ideas that completely mesh very well together. But I kind of learned from that, and I was like, that's raising the difficulty bar a bit too much to expect people to go through all these different mini games and puzzles. And so yeah, just keep it short, sweet, fairly easy, and let people experience the story, because that's like the biggest appeal factor, I think.
On this topic of characters and their methods and how they solve different crimes, I'm very curious if you've ever thought about this question before, and maybe your fans are also curious about this question. What method do you have for solving a mystery? If you have
one. I've never been asked that. Let me think. Well, I would say that my method is meta, in that I'm always thinking about what the author is thinking.
That's a good answer.
And yeah, so it's more like I'm thinking more about what the author is thinking than I am about mystery stuff. Like I'm thinking, oh, the author put this character here as like the scapegoat character that they want me to think is the killer, so I will assume that a different person is the killer. Like I'm always thinking about like that kind of stuff. But I'm usually pretty bad at solving mysteries, by the way. It's not a very good method.
Where do you think you would rank in the competition? I guess probably not.
Bottom 50. Or maybe I would be good, because I mean I am the person who came up with these mysteries.
Yeah. You would know all the answers to all of them. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've created all these different mysteries, and most of them so far are locked room mysteries. Is that a particular genre that you like a lot, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sure do. Because there's something, an impossible crime, the most fun kind of mystery to solve, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's that kind of like scenario where like there isn't too much that's hard to understand about it. Like it's pretty accessible. In terms of like the setup.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy that kind of thing a lot more than follow the suspect type mysteries where it's like going from person to person, being, do you know something about this killer that's stalking people or whatever?
Right.
I think it's more fun to have like those tricks. I was also really into like magic books and stuff, and learning about how magicians, pull off their tricks in magic shows and things. And I think in mystery stories, it is basically, it's like the detective is revealing how the magic trick was done, basically. And I think that's really appealing.
Yeah, I was always into those kinds of things too. I think probably a lot of mystery fans are into that.
Yeah,
The locked room mystery is like the basically as much of a puzzle as you can make a mystery, I think, because it asks you to try and figure something out that seems impossible, but it's not really. Just like a magic trick, like you
right,
said.
exactly.
So
And
if
it's
you're,
also like, how many ways could someone possibly write a mystery? Well, it turns out a lot of ways. It's actually a very flexible scenario for coming up with all kinds of different tricks, and
yeah.
it's really great. I mean, I think at some point someone said like all the possible locked room mysteries have been written.
Hmm.
I don't think so. I think we can write a lot more. So
Yeah, definitely. Um, they also work really well um, for this format of just like solve it and move on to the next one for very, very short mysteries
right,
because you have this perfect setup of you enter a room, the room is locked, and there's a key in the room or whatever, and you can just
right,
essentially duplicate that setup for every room in the building. So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and it keeps it contained to one room,
yeah,
so it's perfect for what I was going for. Absolutely.
yeah. And there were some very, very creative solutions. My favorite
Okay.
one out of the ones that I played so far is the one with the actress in the actor room.
Mm.
The solution to that was one that really made my head spin a little bit, trying to figure
Nice.
that one out. Um, but
Yeah, that's a fun one.
which mystery is your favorite that you wrote for methods?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I like that one a lot. But of course it's the one that everybody likes, which is the sixth stage
Hmm.
mystery. Um, which is
That's
everyone's favorite mystery.
that's toward
I
the
would
end,
say.
right? The
That
six.
is the final mystery in the
Okay.
game.
Okay.
But yeah, I have a lot of favorite ones. I have one that you probably haven't played yet, but it takes place in a billiard room. And I know the solution makes no sense scientifically, but I really like that one, just from a comedy and creativity perspective.
Yeah, I think going into these, you kind of have to uh I don't want to say remove your suspension of disbelief, but some of these are a little out there. But that's kind of what I enjoy the most are the ones that are they really stretch your creativity and make you think. They make you
Right.
rethink what's possible. I like those the most.
I think I would say you need to stretch your sense of belief a little bit, for sure. But yeah, the whole thing is very tongue in cheek and goofy, and I think it like if you go in expecting it to take itself really seriously and have super logical puzzles or something, I think you're not going to have as much fun as if you come in with sort of just wanting to have fun and not think too deeply about some of these puzzles. But yeah.
With that in mind, how has the gameplay or the story or any aspect of the game, how has that evolved in your next game, the prequel, Canada Files?
Hmm. It's very different actually. Um, I took sort of a look at what people who played methods wanted from the game that wasn't there, and one of those things was like longer, more involved mysteries where it's harder to guess the solution,
Hmm.
and that's something I've really tried to deliver on in the Canada Files. So I spend like way longer planning out these mysteries, and they're pretty long. They do take place over like 3 chapters, but each chapter, playing a whole file takes about 2 hours, I would say. So they're much more substantial, and it is much. There are more puzzles, and it borrows kind of the Ace Attorney system for solving mysteries, where you have the evidence and you're finding contradictions and things, and then on the character front, I'm dealing with a smaller cast. I mean, there's still a lot of characters, but it's centered around a team this time of 5 detectives.
Hmm.
And so I'm really trying to go sort of more in depth with their characters and have more subtlety and nuance in their characterization.
Hmm.
And it's more grounded, I would say, tonally. So it's sort of like the the older cousin of methods. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Interesting. So it's like if you get introduced to methods and all the lighthearted comedy stuff, and
Hmm.
then you kind of want something more, this goes a little bit deeper and maybe gets more serious.
It does, yeah, and it still has jokes and still, it
Hmm.
has some of the tone from methods, but it is going for something
Hmm.
a little different.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to play too much of Canada Files. Actually, let me ask you this.
Hmm.
Does it make sense for someone who's never played methods to just jump right into Canada Files first?
So I don't think so personally. Like I think it's more meant to be played uh, after you've played methods. I don't really bother explaining any of the connections in the game. I think it's possible to play it before methods, but I wouldn't really recommend it because a lot of the most fun parts of it have to do with, you know, wow, there's the cameo from a character in methods and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, you could play it, but I think it's an expansion of the world, and so it's not really trying to stand on its own completely.
Hmm. Yeah, so I didn't really want to get too deep into that without playing methods first. I
Hmm.
guess, well, I call the first game methods. Is that how you refer to that? Because they're both sort of titled methods.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah. I say methods and then the Canada files for the
yeah.
the Canada.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I figured I would play through the first game before going into Canada Files, but then I kind of realized, well, I should at least take a peek before we have our
Hmm.
conversation here. So, um, you did do something interesting where you have that team set up and you have actually, I don't know if this ends up happening in the first game or not, but you have them working together. Well, it
Hmm.
kind of happens in the first game at different points, but you actually have like interactive gameplay here where they're like combining their methods together, which is really cool, like from the get
Hmm.
go. Um,
Right. Yeah, it's sort of interactive. Like it's sort of an illusion of, yeah. So it seems like you can choose any method. It's actually like only one method is available,
oh,
pretty
okay.
much.
So it's like a
But yeah, just having all the methods there makes it feel like more like a
hmm.
interactive choice, I guess.
Awesome. The illusion of choice is what.
The illusion of choice,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, yeah, and in well, this is another question, I guess, for methods in the first place is
Hmm.
there are different points in the game where you are asked multiple choice options on what the solution to the mystery is. And initially, I was just doing really well, and I thought, well, okay, it probably doesn't matter because usually I would pick a wrong answer and it wouldn't really matter. And but then at some point, it started to matter where I needed to pick the right answers or it would do a game over. How did you conceptualize, how you should deal with player feedback? Like, should it be necessary for the player to pick all the right answers, or what should their punishment be if they get it wrong? How did you go about thinking about what to do for that?
Right. Yeah, in the beginning I actually had it harsher. So I've since changed the game to make it less harsh. I think, yeah, before it was like you get one answer wrong. You have to redo the whole thing, which is frustrating.
Hmm.
So I don't recommend doing that. Um, Now it's a little softer. I can't quite remember if I changed it. But about midway through the game, I actually make it so that you don't need to get any answers right to
Oh,
proceed.
oh
Because
wow.
I realized like it's just annoying to get a game over. And I'm annoyed by it. Everyone I know who gets it is annoyed by it. So it's like, what value is that actually adding? Like we as a game designer, like often you think about punishment versus reward
Hmm.
for players, right?
Right.
And like what's an appropriate punishment and like what we want there to be consequences for getting something wrong. Right? And the way I've addressed this in Canada files is to have it be that there's no like game over or anything, but there's a separate scoring system that gives you like an F for getting every answer wrong initially,
Mm.
something like that. And the scoring system has like no effect on anything. It's literally just a letter grade. But I think it just adds, that feeling like, I want to get an S ranking.
Hmm.
I think that's a better approach. than saying like you have to replay this over and
Right.
over. So I would change that.
I know that we've had a lot of discussions in the past about different ideas for mystery game design. Um, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on the topic. So,
Hmm.
what do you see? What do you find most interesting about mystery games in the first place that makes you want to work on them? And what are you interested in like seeing from more mystery games in the future?
Hmm. Well, I think for me, I love mystery stories, and that's what really draws me to the games is like the possibility of like what mystery have they come up with, and like what detective is solving the mystery and what their personality's like, and like you know what tricks the culprit used and stuff like that. That's sort of the appeal for me in both mystery stories and mystery games. From the game perspective, it does the interactivity of it um, is something I'm a really big fan of. Like just being able to know around the crime scene and like look at different clues and um, yeah, kind of it sort of just makes it more engaging to have a visual component and like music and sound and everything,
Hmm.
um, which you don't get from the novel from a novel version.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, lately I have been thinking, we make visual novels which are very story heavy, but I'm kind of interested in like what would something with more gameplay potentially look like,
Hmm.
and like thinking about how we could apply lessons from other genres, video games, and how that would work in like a mystery context. Um, I've been thinking about that for a few months now, just trying to think of like different gameplay styles that would work
Hmm.
and maybe be something that we haven't seen yet, you
Hmm.
know.
Now, I was reading your blog on your
Hmm.
website, and you mentioned something about one of your future games maybe being a 3D exploration kind of game.
Yeah.
Is that sort of like a shift in
Oh,
that
which
direction?
one?
Well, which one? Okay. Uh, I was
Yeah.
thinking of motives. You mentioned
Yeah.
motives. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that one is going to be in Unity, and have 3D crime scenes that you can explore. Yeah.
Hmm. I always thought that would be a really cool idea myself. I tried that out. It's very difficult. Well, the hardest part about that
Hmm.
actually is if you don't know how to do a 3D model, if you don't know how to make 3D models, which I didn't. So,
Right.
if you know how to do that, which you clearly do, I think you'll be fine. Um,
Hmm.
uh,
Maybe not from the programming point of view for me. It's
yeah, that's,
that's my weakness.
hmm,
But I've also been thinking about like, making something more nonlinear and more of an immersive sim kind of experience where, you can take many different approaches to solving the mystery and you have like a certain set of tools that you can use.
hmm,
Uh, Something like that I think could be really good, but of course, on an indie budget scale, what's the most you can do?
right.
um, I think we're all a little limited in that way by just the resources we have.
You now have a publisher, Arabit Studios.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
and how has that been going for you as opposed to, because you've done everything with methods on your own, basically, up until that point. Um, how's it been
Right.
getting a publisher now and working with them to do a lot of different things, I think. So
Hmm.
how has that been going?
Well, for me, it's great because what I really have always wanted to focus on is the like creation part of it and not the marketing
Hmm.
part of it.
Right.
Um, that's just not really something I want to spend too much of my time doing. So, from that point of view, I think it's really great to have a publisher because, like I said, I was just dumping my games on Steam with like no lead up, no market. Um, and I was pretty okay with that because for me, it was about creating it and feeling like uh, I've my success was finishing the project basically. So any sales that happened afterwards were just, a little bonus.
Hmm.
That's
Right.
kind of how my mindset was, and largely still is. I mean, um, so having like a whole team of people who, and it's not a big team, but just a few people who are also helping out in like creating advertising campaigns, having booths at actual conventions and stuff.
Wow.
I think that's great, and it's something that I would not be able to do. Like I don't have the resources or energy really to go to like a whole bunch of different conventions and sit there
Right. So
and
they
stuff. But
so
yeah,
they set up the booth and you don't even have to show up and they just run it all for you basically.
yeah. I mean, it's in China, so I would have
Oh,
to
okay. That's
fly to China.
that's also a
Um,
factor. Yeah.
yeah, which I'm open to doing. I mean, I think it'd be awesome to go to a convention and meet the fans and everything.
Hmm.
Um, but I have no idea when I'd be able to do that. And having a presence at a convention is like really cool.
Hmm. Yeah.
Definitely. Arabit is like a Chinese-based publisher,
Oh wow.
so I think they're really great at like communicating with the Chinese fan base and knowing that market and being able to write things in Chinese and stuff. So that's something that a lot of the publishers I was talking to wouldn't be able to do. But maybe they would have helped me gain more popularity in America or something.
Hmm.
But I think you should focus your attention on on your strengths, and that's kind of what I did with methods. Is my strengths are like more comedy stuff and like ensemble casts and um, like short little uh, silly puzzles
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. So I played to my strengths there, and then um, with the methods audience, I mean, I focus most of my efforts on the Chinese audience, and I'm not really trying to like make a huge push to make it popular somewhere else.
Hmm.
Um, but if that happens, then I will sort of expand where I'm spending my attention. But yeah, I think indie developers often they do need a publisher just because it's really hard to market a game and develop it at the same time.
Yeah, that's very true. At what point should a developer consider a publisher if you've gone so long without one and now you have one? Do you think maybe you should have gone with one sooner, or is there a point where you can
Hmm.
sort of find out this is the right time to get a publisher for me?
I think you need to probably have made one game, at least one game first, because then you will kind of understand like if you really want to be doing this, because it is a big commitment.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not for everyone, and a lot of people do kind of drop out after their first game. Um, so their first game, I think, should be more low stakes. Like it shouldn't be all or nothing. Like a publisher is usually gonna come in when like what attracts publishers to a game is seeing that there's interest. They're always asking like how many wish lists do you have
Hmm.
and stuff. I guess in that scenario, like if your first game has a lot of wish lists and everything and a publisher reaches out to you, I would say, go. Um, but I think it is helpful to have released a game first so that yes, I can do this, I can finish a game. And then you have that comparison rate of like, I released this game without a publisher, and then I released my next game with a publisher, and then you can kind of compare the experiences and see, you know, maybe you don't need a publisher. A lot of game developers probably don't need publishers because they achieved massive success without one. So, um, yeah, it's kind of a tricky question because it's case by case, I think. But I think most of all, it's like, are you committed?
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer and piece of advice because it's a difficult like making games is not easy. It's difficult. And
Yeah.
committing to a publisher it's a serious commitment, you know. So if you're not entirely sure what you're in for, it's good to get that practice in with, completing one full game, even if it's a small
Right.
game or something like that, just to understand what's all involved in the process. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And also because the publisher, like in your contract with the publisher, they take a cut of what the game makes. So if you have a game where they aren't taking a cut and that game does pretty well, then you have a little more financial backing, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
like a more of a foundation. And I mean, I've heard of publisher contracts where they like offer you money up front to make a game, and I'm guessing that that is an extremely small percentage of publisher deals.
Hmm. I don't really know
Like,
myself, but I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, that's just a guess from me too. The majority of them that are a cut of profits and not like offering you money up front.
Right. And that probably makes sense from their perspective because it's less risk on their part.
Yeah.
So it's a business transaction, right? Um,
Yeah, it really is like getting into the whole business side of game development.
do you prefer to see it as a business or just keep it more like a fun hobby?
For me, it should be fun. Um, if it's just a business, then I don't know. I don't need to make games if it's just a business for me. I could be a publisher instead. So yeah, I think it has to be about the fun and genuinely loving game development
Hmm.
and creating.
Yeah, like most game developers, you have that creative spark. I mean, like I said, you've done a lot of creative things. What what is
Yeah.
it that got you involved in this creative industry in the first place? Whether it was like, did you get started uh with games or did you start somewhere else?
I started making home movies
Oh wow.
when I was a kid. I would make lots and lots of movies and with my friends and stuff.
Hmm.
And I wanted to be a movie director. And then I also was super into comics. I wanted to be a director, like a movie director, and I made a lot of like short films, stop motion film, live action films, and then I got into video game like development when I was 9 or something. Um, in Unity actually,
Oh wow.
but then I started like making games on Scratch, which is the sort of an educational programming tool that people make games in.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
it's to help kids learn how to code, basically.
right.
But yeah, I kind of made a lot of games on Scratch a very long time, like a whole decade of my life. I was still making games on Scratch, and I had kind of a fan base there too. Um, so yeah, that's a big part of my game development journey is making little games and animations on Scratch.
Yeah, so you started with film, but one of your other passions is music. You did a lot of music
Mm.
for a lot of different things. I just want to squeeze this in here real quick
Yeah,
because you have so much to talk about. Tell me a little bit
yeah.
about how you got into music and what that means for you.
Well, music and composing is the sort of latest creative tool. But yes, I did get into it in like around 2014. I started making songs in GarageBand, and I had this project called Epic Tracks, and then I would release that, and they were all like, not great. But the idea was you make a ton of them. Eventually, you get better.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Hmm.
I released over 100 tracks just doing that.
Hmm.
And then I found out about this forum, the Lemasoft forum, and I decided to just put my hat in the ring and put my post up about being a composer. And yeah, I got contacted by way more people than I thought I would.
Wow.
But I was very cheap to hire. It was like $15 a minute of music, which looking back on is very underpriced,
Mm-hmm.
even for my not so great music skills back then. But yeah, over the years, I've composed many different visual novel projects, many of Nehru's projects, Blankspace, and the elevator game with Catgirls, and some other projects like that, and also sort of a Ruby fan project called JPDE that I contributed a lot of tracks to.
Mm-hmm.
And those are have sort of been my two main clients over the years. But I would say, yeah, if you want to get into music, just start composing. It's a very low barrier to entry, I think.
Do you have a particular software that you use to compose that you like to use?
Yeah, I'm a Mac user, so it's Logic for me. And it's a super great DAW. I mean, it has so many features and a lot of plugins are compatible. It's very easy to use, I think. So
I am curious about this question on the topic of music. The soundtrack for Methods is pretty much jazz music, right? Like detective style jazz. Is
my attempt at it.
Your attempt at it. It's a very good attempt. What kind of music do you like to listen to, and what do you like to create?
So I mostly listen to like movie soundtracks and game soundtracks, and then occasionally like a lot of J-pop tracks and things like that. I don't know, because I don't really go and listen to like a lot of music actually. It's more like disparate songs that I like that find their way into my style and stuff. So I don't really have like one genre that I listen to in particular, other than like I guess you would call it soundtrack. So I'm pretty basic in that way.
I think that's pretty relatable, though. I mean, I listen to video game soundtracks all the time.
Yeah.
So.
You know, I just listened to all the Game Awards orchestra compilations. You know, they play like all the different themes from every game in that year, and I found it very touching, actually. I was tearing up hearing those game themes being played. I mean, that's the power of music, is really its ability to move you emotionally. There are like specific tracks that I'm very influenced by, that you can, if you listen to them, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's where he got that. One of them is the National Treasure theme. It's
good movie.
Yeah,
I like that movie.
An amazing movie, masterpiece. 10 out of 10. And yeah, the theme is really hype and awesome, and gets you in the mood to like go do a heist, steal the Declaration of Independence, or you know. So I think about that one when I want to like create an exciting track, and then another one is the theme to Halloween.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Halloween and the Exorcist theme as well. I just really like those kind of repeating pattern where like the pattern, there's some odd thing about it, like the way the notes are arranged that kind of makes it a little stickier in your head.
I actually thought about that last night when I was getting ready for this interview. I thought, you know, in your songs, in Methods, and even for other game music that you've done, you have these repeatable patterns that are in there. I was thinking exactly that.
Yes. There's like yeah, that's almost entirely Exorcist and Halloween influence there.
Wow.
Just kind of like kind of sad, but also a little bit. I mean, you can kind of bop to that. It actually, like, if you look up the story of that Exorcist theme, it started as a dance track, and they just put it in the Exorcist movie, and suddenly it's associated with, you know, a horror movie, and it's very effective. But yeah, it's, for me, it's those repeating patterns and trying to find that, and I think that kind of defines my musical style for the most part.
I do have to mention, you know, one of the soundtracks you composed was also for our entry into Spooktober 2023, Replaced for the official Mystery Gamedev entry into that competition, where not only did the game win third place, but the soundtrack also won best soundtrack. And it was you in combination with another one of our composers, who made that soundtrack. And just again, so our listeners understand, there were over 200 entries into that competition, and our game that we worked on had the best soundtrack. So that's a really impressive feat to accomplish. So you've done quite a lot for Mystery Gamedev, not just in that respect, but in all around. You've been a very active participant in the community. You've answered a lot of questions for people, and had some very interesting discussions in our monthly Q&A calls that we have for developers. So I have to thank you for that, because it's been really awesome having you here and having you as a supporter. It's been a really awesome ride. And I have to give you a chance to answer this question, which is, what has been the best part for you about joining the Mystery Game Dev community, and how would you like to see the community evolve going forward?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for creating the community, because I think I was having trouble like finding a space where I fit in terms of like fellow developers. You know, creating a visual novel is pretty different from creating other types of games, because we are kind of like authors more than developers in many ways. So there was already that kind of difference where I could like relate to other game developers in some ways, but mostly not. And then on top of that, being a mystery visual novel developer is a niche within a niche, and there's some overlap in like the dating sim or other types of visual novels, but creating a mystery visual novel really has a lot of unique challenges. So I've enjoyed being in the server and getting to know more developers and discovering more mystery games. And it's been a great experience for me. I think going forward, I just hope that it grows and that it reaches more players on the player side of things, to help sort of spread awareness about all the different indie visual novels that come out and mystery games. Because I know as a player of mystery games that it's hard to find mystery games sometimes, unless you're really paying attention. So it helps to have these resources like the website you're building and stuff, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely happy to be working on this. It's one of the most exciting things that I've been doing recently, if not ever. So I'm always excited to meet new developers and get to know them and be able to help them out. And for me personally, it's just it's something that really, like you said, you can't find people like this very easily. That you can actually relate to. And a lot of the times, it's also because that the fact that you can't find other developers makes it a lot more difficult than it needs to be, where it's just, there's a lot of common problems that we're facing with the kind of games we're trying to make. And what I'm trying to do is make it so that we can overcome these problems a lot easier and solve them for each other, so that we can make better games, and we can make those games faster, and we can potentially, earn a better living from those games, which is what we all want to do. And the people who play the games will enjoy that as well, because they'll get better games, and they'll get them faster, and so on and so forth. So it's something that I'm honestly really excited about doing. So yeah, I'll try to do it as much as I can. I'd love to do it as much as I can.
Yeah, it's super exciting, and it reminds me of those sort of writers' clubs that they would have, even among like mystery authors, and how those relationships and things informed some of the most famous literature we have. And I think the potential of putting our brains together and sharing ideas and having a community is, I think there's a lot of potential there. So, yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question. What advice would you give to someone who wants to make a mystery game but has zero experience?
I would say to make the game that you want to play, first of all. And I also think that, like, in terms of like the actual being able to be familiar with the engine or programming or stuff like that, that there are resources out there to help you, and that, you know, what you imagine, maybe you have to like temper your imagination a little bit and try to work with what you're able to do. But I think you're always able to do more than you think, if you're just willing to put in the time to look things up and be persistent and stick with it. And I would encourage everyone who feels like they want to create something to just do it and just, yeah, get started. Even a failed project is better than never making a project in the first place.
I completely agree. So with that, we've definitely had a very long and interesting conversation. Very thankful that you were able to take time out of your busy schedule to have it and to share your knowledge with the world.
Thank you.
Yeah,
happy to be here.
Yeah, and so where would listeners be able to go to find out more information on you and your projects and what you're currently working on?
Well, my website, LockedOnGames.com, has sort of everything you need to know about me, kind of in all in one place, like all my projects and a whole timeline of like every project I've ever made. And it's a great starting point to sort of find more about my games and where to get them and all of that.
All right, well, thank you so much again, and I'll definitely have to play through the rest of Methods and Canada Files at some point, because I'm having a lot of fun, and I think it's a good game people should go check out and play. We'll have links to those in the description.
Thanks so much.
All right, see you.
See ya.
That concludes today's Mystery Gamedev Podcast episode. To join our community of fans and developers of mystery-themed video games, go to mysterygamedev.com and subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates and more podcast episodes. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.